what do people spend, in their view, too much time on? Instead of framing it as, this is something I don't like to do, just this is something that eats up a lot of time. And if it's something that you can envision automating, there's a good chance that AI can help get you there faster.
You are listening to the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity, where we answer your questions and simplify information security for small businesses. Get the clarity you need to focus on the things that matter.
Well, hello. Welcome back. I'm your host, Accidental CISO, and you are listening to the Mindful Business Security Show. Business leaders everywhere are starting to use AI in their organizations, but implementing new technologies can be challenging. As a technology, AI, especially generative AI, is different from other IT tools. It's powerful and flexible, but with that comes a degree of unpredictability. And when things go wrong, they can go really wrong. Speaking of things going wrong, things are a little interesting today because this is the first time we're recording the episode via a live stream with a live audience. I have no idea how this is going to go. I kind of have an idea for the last few minutes because it was a rough start just getting the stream started. I don't know who the callers will be or who's going to show up. I don't know what their questions or comments are going to be. So, hey, this is going to keep things exciting. If you aren't already subscribed, please take a moment and do that so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you want to join in live, we record on the third Friday of every month at 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern. More information is available on the show page at focivity.com/podcast. My guest today appeared on the show a couple of years ago when we were discussing what small business owners and leaders should know about artificial intelligence. Quite a bit's changed since then. He's been in this space for a long time, and he's back again to share more of his experience and expertise. Welcome back to the show, Brent Hinks.
Hey, thank you very much for having me again.
Yeah, I'm glad you could join because you've been doing this AI implementation stuff for quite some time. As I mentioned, as you've been helping folks implement AI tools, can you share a little bit about the kinds of things that you were helping your customers do, maybe a little more specifically, and what you're doing today?
Sure. So, like you said, I've been in this space for a little over a decade. I've focused a lot on helping companies adopt AI, as an initial practice that they are building up in the organization. I've focused a lot of that time on the predictive and like machine learning side of things, but obviously in the past few years, the generative use cases have been coming in, and I've been helping organizations with agent-driven workflows, setting up AI centers of excellence within the organizations, things like that. Today, I'm actually more on the product engineering side again, working with a startup called Air Platforms, where we do AI-powered credit ratings and risk analysis. So yeah, I've seen a little bit of everything with my past role at DataRobot, and still in the AI space today.
And I bet it's been fun for you to get back to the engineering side, because I know when we worked together in what feels almost like a past life to now, you were on the engineering side and I was on the ops side, and sort of that DevOps model. And this is at a time before DevOps was even a thing, the very, very beginning of it. And I kept calling it embedded ops, at that point. So it's cool to hear you're back on the engineering side for a little bit. I bet that's been nice for you to get back to it.
Yeah, for sure. I did miss it. Although now I still have very fond memories of working with customers, and wherever I can go to solve problems, I'm happy.
Yeah, that's really the right way to think about it, because it's about solving problems and value to the customer. Without that, nothing else really works. So with the implementation stuff that you worked on over those times, I imagine that you saw different implementation projects or things with customers ultimately end up maybe not going the way that they had planned. And some of them may have failed. I don't know how spectacularly they may have failed if they had somebody like you that there was helping shepherd them through it. It wasn't like that they were going through it just all on their own. But do you have sort of any stories from the trenches, so to speak, of the years of doing this, where things didn't go right, they didn't work out for the client for various reasons, and curious if you have any favorites along the way.
Oh, so I mean, I've seen a lot of projects, not make it to their full fruition, um, just based on poor time management or poor expectations of how long it's going to take to implement some of these things. Um, there's there's still a lot of that feeling that AI is kind of a magic bullet that you just put it in front of the problem and things start working. You start getting insights. But really to properly implement an AI use case, even today with all of the tools that are available, there's a lot of time and attention that needs to go into making sure you're implementing things safely, um, making sure you're actually getting the results that you expect. So I've seen a lot of projects kind of just die out before they come to fruition because the requirements around the use case have changed. You know, there are a whole host of reasons, but the time it takes and the care it takes to implement them successfully, I think, is often underestimated.
Any sort of broad themes that you've noticed that kind of consistently contribute to failure?
Yeah, I think trust without guardrails. We can definitely talk about some specific cases that have been out in the news media around that, but making sure especially with generative AI like chatbots and things that you're going to put in end user hands, you know making sure that it stays on topic and stays grounded in the sort of knowledge base that you've built for it is very important. So you're not getting wacky hallucinated answers to questions. In some cases, just completely improper or even illegal advice. I think another thing that I see a lot more commonly now in the generative AI era is use like AI is kind of a bazooka that will be used to kill a mosquito in a lot of cases. Like there are um, a lot of small problems that I think are better suited for traditional software engineering that AI has become a common tool to help with some of those use cases, and a lot of times it's in the hands of less technical folks that maybe don't have the expertise to understand what the AI is doing. So I think there are opportunities there for projects to kind of creep outside of the realm of safety uh, or just feasibility.
I do see that a lot, that folks are leaders. I'm hearing stories about this. I'm not seeing this in my own clients, because the businesses that I work with in my consulting, the types of businesses that are going to work with somebody like me as a security advisor, or VC, so generally aren't the types that are just going to run forward with stuff without some prior planning. They, it's sort of a self-selecting group there. But I am hearing a lot of other companies and kind of people in my network talk about things that they'll see where all of a sudden they get an email, or there's an all hands meeting and leadership is saying, all right, starting today, everybody has to use AI. And there's not much, guidance put around it. Like, what should we use it for? Like, here we're giving you a tool, any of the myriad of tools that are, built onto these platforms. I've heard that where they've told the developers, basically you shouldn't be writing code anymore. The AI should be writing the code and you're supervising that now. And that can be rough if you've got an individual contributor who likes writing code and doesn't want to be a manager. And now AI is almost like trying to manage a junior person or an intern or something. It makes the job something that you hadn't seen before. So I think buy-in is a big thing. Stakeholder buy-in is a big thing for me that I really worry about as my clients start rolling forward with this. Like I could see that being a big problem where people are like, oh yeah, you want me to figure out and document and come up with processes and ways to use this tool that's eventually going to replace me. Sure thing, boss. There's a lot of I think concern with folks around there. So
I do see a lot of sort of top level buy-in without knowing what they're buying. It's an initiative to use the technology, and I've seen some organizations organize maybe hackathons where they'll bring in people from different domains across the company and have them just kind of come up with ideas. We have this tool, we want to use this tool, show us where we can apply it. And sometimes very good output comes from exercises like that, but it's very cart before the horse.
I could see that becoming a big problem. That skunkworks proof of concept somebody builds and it looks useful, and all of a sudden a manager or something shows a director or some other executive, and next thing you know, the CEO gets wind of it and they're like, hey, there's our AI initiative, that's production now. And we've seen that happen with software. You and I working in SaaS shops all the time. POCs get pushed into production, much to the developer's chagrin often. And this is kind of one of those times too where that can happen. Another thing that I think happens with rushing that stuff out is like the data. And I know that was an area that you were big with. Can you talk a little bit like that of what you've seen? And maybe if we flip it around to the positive and look at like, what are the things that folks should do? So we're not just focusing on, oh, all these bad things can happen. I tend to like say, yes, bad things can happen, but here's what we can do about them. So, maybe in this case, can you talk a little bit about like the readiness? Like how would an organization know they're ready? From a data standpoint, from an infrastructure standpoint, maybe a little bit from a people standpoint or what have you.
AI is a very broad technology and can incorporate a lot of different things. If we're talking specifically about generative technologies, you basically want to have data ready that you would use to onboard a person. Really, I think the issues that I've seen with data readiness are typically stale data is being used to ground a generative use case, which that can lead to some big problems. If there are policy changes or different versions of policies that it's having to interpret, you can get some off the wall answers. I think there's also probably more of an emphasis put on big data sets, like to train and ground models, where there's been plenty of research showing that when you give a generative chatbot too much information to ground itself in, it loses track of what it has access to. So being able to manage the context of these calls to these models is very important. So sometimes having a smaller corpus of data that's more targeted, more clear is going to be a lot more helpful than throwing the whole library at it.
So as somebody's looking at getting ready to start and implement this, this being some sort of a AI tool, likely at this point, generative AI. Like, I think that's kind of taken over kind of the same way that cryptocurrency has taken over the term crypto. I feel like generative AI has kind of taken over the term AI in, common parlance. So what would you suggest folks follow as sort of a high level playbook for implementing AI and making sure that like that the project has the best chance of success? Like any key things that you would make sure to include in that?
So, a couple important things. One is to evaluate tools and make sure that you're selecting a model and a toolkit that makes sense for your use case and that provides good signal in your use case. So at Data Robot, for example, we had sort of an LLM evaluation playground where you could issue prompts against multiple LLMs and look at responses side by side to see with metrics included that show how well it stayed on topic, how accurate the information it provided is, how fast it came back with the answer. Depending on what the key metrics are that you're interested in. Sometimes a fast answer is better than a right answer. Sometimes that is devastating. So it's unwise to put too much trust on a single model or tool set from the outset, and make sure you evaluate what's available. Another is human in the loop. It's extremely important, and I've seen plenty of organizations that either from a lack of staff availability or just from overconfidence, they put a lot of trust in the model to do what it needs to do, but you really need human oversight. Just as much as human workers need human oversight. You don't want, especially in the realm of coding agents, letting them go off and do whatever they need to with no approval gates, with no reviews over time. You can end up with something that's truly unmaintainable, even by the AI itself. So, yeah, I think making sure you embed people in the process and do frequent reviews of the outputs, those are important things.
And that's an area where I think as I start working with my clients on their AI initiatives and supporting that, because I know there's a few of them that are starting, and they're starting right now, as they should, with policy first, and looking at the governance of it, and I've been working on helping them put together their AI policies. And generally, we start with a policy around using as a tool as kind of phase one, and then if they're going to develop AI-based features in their products, or internal applications or anything like that becomes now a phase two, developing the AI stuff. And one of the key items in the policies that I've been working with them on is that human in the loop. Making sure that we have an AI officer to help with setting direction and governance, that accountable stakeholder at the executive level, but also human in the loop in just the general day-to-day tactical, doing the work. And I think that's an area that organization may struggle with, because if they're trying to use AI to boost efficiency or velocity, get more work done in less time, less resources, you're trying to scale in a way that makes it difficult for humans now to be that human in the loop. Because what do you supervise, what don't you supervise, can become a challenge when you're trying to automate things. But having to have a human approve everything before it goes out gets tricky too. So that is going to be a challenge. And based on kind of what you've seen done for that in the past, any thoughts that small business owners and leaders, not necessarily huge enterprise stuff, because this show is mostly focused around small organizations, things that they should keep in mind or try to do, or kind of models that work well for that to keep the human in the loop while still gaining some of the speed that they're going to try to achieve with generative AI tools?
Sure, sure. So I think, you touched on governance, and I think looking at governance tools, that you can still automate some of these output evaluations and things, um, by implementing, some kind of a middleware solution that helps with the governance by sort of proxying your prompts and responses and evaluating them as they're flowing. So you're not necessarily having to look over all of the output, and put real manual thought into it. You can, have more of a sort of dashboard experience. Looking at your governance tool, you can kind of sample and spot check things that look out of place, from just a metrics standpoint. It's very important to have that layer established, whether it's, something that's more manual, which I think a lot of organizations want to avoid, or something that's software based.
I'm learning so much about this stuff right now. Like it's moving so fast, and developing just so quickly the capabilities. Hearing in the news recently that Anthropic is, got stuff that they just can't even release right now. That they're doing, kind of closed releases with strategic partners and things. It is a little scary how fast this is moving compared to any other technology. I would go as far as say in the history of man at this point, and I still don't even know enough to know what I don't know. Like as we're thinking through this, I'm trying to think like what questions do I want to ask, and what should I know about? What should the listeners know about? And that's been a real challenge with this topic for me, just because it is so new and changing so fast.
It is changing very fast, and it's difficult to stay on top of all the changes, and to know what technologies to select in a lot of cases. But there's never going to be a point where you understand the full landscape. So you do kind of have to jump in and start somewhere. Um, I personally have been a big fan of using Anthropic's tools. I use Claude Code, not very heavily, but fairly heavily. I uh, I use the agents and APIs that Anthropic makes available for helping with research tasks and things like that, and have used those APIs for delivering client projects as well. So I think, like, as as a starting point, OpenAI and Anthropic are kind of where they're at for a reason. Um, those are very good entry points to getting a model in front of users, or building up that initial tool set. Um, but then there's a lot of organizations still have concerns around the data sharing, and using those cloud services. You can go into your account settings and say, don't train your models on my data, but That checkbox, I think, is doing a lot of work to try to instill trust in
There's a
the
lot of trust,
yeah.
a lot of
So
trust there.
there's a lot of really exciting developments happening in the realm of open source language models. I think that's as a starting point, or something for a small organization to look at. That can be kind of a heavy lift, but it is getting more and more possible to totally own your AI ecosystem and keep it inside your fence.
Which is good to hear. Like I'm glad that that's coming along and that the hardware is becoming available that can do this stuff with reasonable performance. So, all right. So we've got some folks here with questions to be callers.
Do the cybersecurity risks to your business have you confused? Visit Focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast and sign up to be a caller on a future episode.
So our first caller on the show today is Brian from New York. Brian, welcome to the show. It is fantastic to have you here. How can we help, and what you got for us today?
Thank you. And this is a really exciting topic. Brent, listening to you guys go back and forth really has been a kind of interesting one, because we're at the beginning of our journey in AI and trying to figure it out. And I think my question is, I have tons of questions. I could take up the whole time, but my number one question really is, how do you manage sort of the brainstorming use case conversation? Because I think everyone gets excited about AI, but they're either extremely emotionally against it or they're extremely emotionally for it. But then when you get into what we experience is, when you get into, well, what do you want to do with it? The room goes silent. And so we piloted certain things, and the pilot was like, well, the tools work. We couldn't quite figure out what to what's the use case, what's the thing that it wasn't a mandate that we had to use it. Just how do you get your clients to really get into that mode of where they're able to start generating projects out of it?
Yeah, so I think that is a common problem. It's a big fun tool that people want to use. It's a powerful tool, but it's not good at everything. And I think that's the first place to start is, you can kind of seed the conversation with some examples of where it sees success. There are a lot of common use cases like in customer support. Things where you have frequent interactions with outside users, and you don't have the staffing to field all those requests. Something like that is a great starting point. Using it for internal knowledge work is typically very powerful. When you start getting into some of the more technical things, like using uh, an LLM with associated tools that can actually take action in out in the real world, you want to be obviously a lot more mindful of how much access you're giving it. But I think kind of starting with the use cases where where maybe staffing is a problem. It's like, what is something that I could put another person on to help with, and is the contribution that person would make, something that AI can help accelerate or enhance. Not to say AI is a replacement for a person, but it's definitely a force multiplier for the people that you do have. So one or two people plus an AI companion can get a lot of work done, and I've seen that in my current organization. I think really focusing on those force multiplier kind of use cases is a good starting point. But also keep in mind too that AI is often not the solution. So when you have a problem presented to you, make sure to think about whether or not the AI solution really makes sense.
I've heard someone say, I think that's a great answer. I've heard someone say, if you want to sort of generate those conversations, pick a task that no one wants to do, because if you pick something that people like doing or want to do, they feel threatened. But you pick a task that's so tedious and so awful and so abhorrent in the organization, and then set them to a task of getting AI to do that's the way to get generate. But nobody, I don't know if it works, like because no one will admit to a task they don't want to do, at least in front of the boss, right? Like, if the boss is like, "Tell me what you don't like doing," everyone goes, "Oh no, I love doing that. No, no, boss, I'm great doing that." But behind the scenes, they're like, "Oh God, I hate doing that." And I've tried to do it within my own personal tasks and say, well, what's the task I really just don't want to do? If I can identify that, that's what I'm going to try to work on from an AI standpoint. I just haven't figured out what that is either.
I love that. Like, there's such a cultural component to that of leadership, of managers truly knowing their teams and understanding like what motivates them, what do they like to do, what do they not like to do. Like that's an area where organizations that have that healthy part of the culture where folks can speak up and say, I really don't like doing this thing, and they don't have to fear, judgment or anything for that. That's I hadn't considered that before. So
A good analog to that is what do people spend in their view too much time on, instead of framing it as this is something I don't like to do, just this is something that eats up a lot of time. And if it's something that you can envision automating, there's a good chance that AI can help get you there faster.
It's a good way to put it. Well, my regular job is in security, and so I always kind of flip to that. That's like the hat that I will put on eventually, and then of course I get terrified and then I hang up. So, but the you know. When we get into this, I think earlier in the show you mentioned some of the security aspects, especially in terms of access control. But do you often get questions about data classification and readiness in that standpoint? That it's not just getting the data right in terms of being ready for generative AI and getting good answers out of it, but making sure that only the information you want to be potentially exposed is in that. Are companies, especially small companies, really investing in DLP and data classification tools to go along with this as a guardrail, or are they just kind of winging it?
Data classification is definitely, like, if it's part of your security practice, then it absolutely has to be part of your AI practice. And I to be perfectly honest, a lot of the organizations that I've worked with that have had data classification policies opt to not use AI in a lot of cases because they simply don't have the trust in those external tools. I've worked with a lot of organizations that didn't put a strong policy in place and put chat gpt in the hands of folks too early, and they ended up leaking some pretty sensitive data, and not out of obviously any kind of malicious intent or anything, just playing around, seeing what kind of signal they can get from the models, and not really thinking about what they're providing to that third party. Um, there's definitely a lot of opportunities, for the middleware sort of solution that I mentioned before. You want something that's going to act as a filter, and not provide any kind of classified or protected data to the LLMs. Um, in many cases, that kind of data isn't really going to provide much help, anyway, depending on the use case, obviously. But so you can put guardrails in place that monitor for the presence of that protected data. There are off the shelf models, like machine learning models, that you can use to identify potentially protected or private data inside of a prompt, and then you can block it from going out to that service. Or if money is no object, which is very, very seldom the case, you can like I said, bring in an open source model, and then you can at least be confident that any protected data that it gets access to, it's not bleeding outside of your organization. But yeah, I think integrating with any data classification tools that you're using, like that should be the highest priority.
And your question, like, are small businesses investing in this? Not that I'm seeing. Like that, I would just a resounding no. Like I that's not something that I'm seeing in the small business space. I'm not even seeing them, doing traditional DLP and stuff, because those are historically very heavy tools to get implemented and dialed in. And even when I'm helping a client who's very forward thinking about security, build a security program, DLP is never something that's in like a phase one or even phase two. Like this is, if you look at that, crawl, walk, run kind of thing, like DLP is
Yeah,
down the
that's definitely a
road.
run.
Because
Yeah,
so many people,
yeah,
they organizations that do put it in, they turn it on, and it's so noisy they either ignore it or they just turn it right back off because they just can't handle all the stuff that comes out of it. So again, because they didn't do the classification work, they didn't do the identification, they
right.
don't really truly understand what they have and where it all is.
Absolutely. And to your point, it feels very much like if I'm if and I understand it from the business point of view, it doesn't generate any revenue whatsoever. It's not even close to something that you can turn into a board presentation or a small presentation to people and say, look, this is going to help us make money. It's not. But I think when we start to couch it in terms of, well, we can use AI more freely if we do these things with DLP and data classification, it gives it a purpose that's different from what we've had in the past. Because I know within our organization here, it was a struggle when we explained classification, like a lot of blank faces, a lot of I don't want to do this, and if they didn't want to do it, you knew that one, they were going to underclassify from the start. Like they'll do it because you told them to, but then they'll just make everything as low as possible so they can keep doing what they do. And now that they're faced with a very different mode, you can use this cool new thing. If you classify and make your data clean, then maybe there'll be more incentive to embrace something like that. Because you're right. I can't see. I can't first. I can't picture some of the small companies that I just just do business with as a customer investing in that. I wish they would. They just don't.
Yeah, that's the things that don't generate revenue, but prevent losses later on. It's you have to be a little bit more forward thinking to embrace that.
So I've got a call from, or a call. I have a chat question. Al Not AI from the chat asked, how can an organization claw back access to tools that don't meet their new AI policies, like for vendor selection, those types of things? Um, in his example, decades after adopting, Exchange and AOL and Yahoo and that kind of stuff, like these types of apps still exist, even really old ones. Like his example, AOL and Yahoo is like, God, those are ancient, but I still see people using AOL.com email addresses and that kind of stuff. So once things are out there, they're very sticky. And Brian, if you have thoughts on this too, I know I value your thoughts as a CISO. So Brian has called in, but he's actually one of my CISO friends here as well. So I appreciate him joining in on the show. But yeah, Brian, any thought on as things are changing and organizations are trying to standardize on tooling and they've got new AI policies and they're realizing existing vendors aren't in compliance with that. Um, what does that look like? Have you run into that in your implementation work as far as like getting folks switching tools and like taking things away once they're out there?
I've dealt with a lot of sort of transformation migration sort of projects where we like an AI practice needs to be replatformed. It's a nightmare. Um, it's especially when you lump in machine learning and the huge pile of tools that come along with that. I think on the generative side, one of the nice things that I've been seeing is the different language model vendors are not always willingly, but they have adopted standards that make it not necessarily plug and play, but if you want to move your AI stack from one language model to another, that's not a huge lift anymore. There's a lot of standard protocols and things that make it easy to make those shifts. But yeah, I think this is just a common issue across technology. As long as I've been working in the space, that old stuff never goes away.
There be dragons, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah.
Right. Oh man. Yeah. Brian, thoughts on this? And this isn't. I don't think this is a question that's specific to AI. I think we run across this kind of stuff in security too, where if something doesn't meet our new
Yeah.
policies, like we got to pull something back. But that's hard to
I
do.
I don't have a pure AI example of this, but one of the things that we always had a use for was sort of grammar management tools like Grammarly, et cetera. And so one of the few use cases that kind of took off was using LLMs for grammar and analytics for writing. But our feeling was sort of like, well, if we're embracing that, then we should take Grammarly off the table. It seems like we're paying for, it doesn't seem like we should have both. Uh, and I hope y'all will wish me luck because I have yet to have gotten a single agent off of a single device. I think it's the only way I can picture really being successful at clawing something back like that is to have such resounding success with the other tool where sort of the momentum takes it away. Like, I mean, to use the AOL example, the only way I got my mother-in-law off of AOL was to show her how much easier it was to use Gmail at the time. And then it became, and the fact that the rest of the family was using Gmail. So we just kind of dragged her along. It wasn't like we didn't, I can't picture a scenario where, because people get attached. This is their way of doing things. If they have a tool and it works for them, until you claw it from their cold, dead hands, they're not giving it up. Unless there's something that is so dramatically better, or there's no other choice. I did make an attempt at blocking Google Translate in favor of another tool, and that sort of had the effect of, well, yes, I just ripped it away from everybody, and that worked. But I can't picture that. That's one. It's painful. Two, it does not win you any friends whatsoever, and I'm not sure that it's really ever effective. I think it drives a lot of shadow IT in the end. So I don't know the right answer, but I almost feel like it's one of those things where we have to sort of accept that those things are a part of life, and you just kind of put your own guardrails around that and go with it.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. The only way an organization can do that are the two things you mentioned. Either you force it with some technical policy that you just block it and they can't access it, but that's very heavy-handed, and it creates that shadow IT cat and mouse game and incentivizes people to get creative to work around it. And another friend of mine, Wolf Gorlick, who's another CISO, one of my favorite things is, creative people are dangerous. If you give them an incentive to be creative, creativity can be dangerous when people are trying to work around your stuff. So your first point, though, I think is spot on. It's really the only viable option to take something away that's already out there embedded is to give them something better. I don't see too many other choices.
Yeah, yeah. And with AI, it's difficult because the results have been so uneven. I have people within my organization that, they're clearly doing well with it. And then there's others that are really just sort of struggling to figure something out, or they're struggling with, I think the last point I wanted to make or ask about was really around sort of some of the ethics of being a good AI citizen. I don't know if those are really good words to put together, but the idea around just because you can do a thing, should you? And it's not a security question per se, like we're not talking about sensitive information, but we're talking more about, is that really a good behavior? You know, is it, I guess the example I would use is it okay to use chat gpt to evaluate you, or read over your employee evaluation? Well, maybe for grammar or maybe for tone, but then immediately it goes over that cliff of, did somebody just write my review using chat gpt? Now I'm really paranoid about it. Like, that's an ethical question. Is it good? Is it in? And so as long as those kinds of things exist in AI, it's hard to present like a absolute moral, this is better, like quantitatively this is better than it was before, because we didn't have all those questions before. Most of our careers have been spent around not having something that was that powerful.
Yeah.
Are people struggling with the ethics of it? The not in the big picture ethics, but small picture ethics. Are they struggling with, should we be doing this?
I, I've definitely had some of those conversations, and you're like right on the boundary of some of the use cases that I've talked to people that wanted to bring AI tools into HR practices, which and again, like to your point, there are cases where it can be helpful and used ethically, but that's a very slippery slope because you can get into some dangerous territory very quickly, and in a lot of those cases we see the use cases not going forward. But I haven't dealt with a lot of sort of ethical dilemmas outside of that, but I think your example is very good where it's less of an organizational position and more of a personal one from employee to employee, and how you actually sort of police that kind of usage. It's virtually impossible. AI is a shadow IT factory.
It's interesting. I know I personally struggle a little bit with ethics of it, uh, because to me it comes down to sort of the concept of like academic honesty or academic integrity. When you're in college writing papers and citing your sources and those kinds of things. And I have the same thing with in my professional life of producing something. And is it my work? Am I, I'm giving something to a client saying, this is my work. I did this. But if I'm using AI to generate it or generate large portions of it, it's not really my work. I'm overseeing it. And we're going to see a lot of individual contributors wrestle with this because, and this is something that I think folks struggle with when they first transition to management. And they're now responsible for the work, but they're not the ones, or I'm sorry, they're accountable for the work, but they're not the ones responsible for actually doing the work. And that's something where people are gonna have to grapple with that. And I think it's gonna have to be part of the policies that people put in place in these organizations is, what are those acceptable use cases? What are not acceptable use cases? And just be very clear about, if you're doing work with AI, do you need to let your manager know? And generally that's something that I include in policies that I help my clients make is, if you're using AI in your work, that you need to have transparency with your manager over what is and isn't AI. And that's not just, because you don't want to get caught or something. It's just the manager needs to also understand how much is AI and how much is people in their teams as well. William in the chat says there's a threshold in academia where if you change, more than a certain percent, it's not plagiarism. But that threshold, I think, in my experience, has always been squishy. I don't know, like, how do you even know? Like, did I change enough? Like, I'm taking a class right now, and for the first time ever in my academic career, the assignment instructions actually say to use AI. The last class I took last fall, the same university, the rule was you do not use AI. And I think what's happened was they were running AI checkers and it was creating problems because now it's flagging stuff. Hey, this was written by AI if it wasn't potentially, and those kinds of things. And I had an instance where a professor messaged me and said, hey, your last assignment, this was late in the semester, your last assignment just flagged for like 80% AI content. And every other assignment you've done has been like really, really low on that. He's like, did you do anything different? And I had to think about it for a little bit and I got back to him and I said, yeah, actually I did. The assignment, the research that we did on that assignment was about rebuilding after Hurricane Katrina. And this was long enough ago that I wrote everything in the past tense, which ended up having me put, in addition to past tense, a lot of stuff ended up in passive voice, way more than I am normally comfortable with in my professional academic writing. And he comes back, he goes, yep, checks out. I see what you're talking about. We're good. But luckily, I knew my own writing style and the decisions that I made. I don't know that other students in my class would have been able to recognize, yes, actually, I did do something very different from how I normally write. But also the university, like, if the thing says it was AI, how do you prove the negative? How do you prove it wasn't to some degree that, that they can be comfortable with? And I think part of them saying use AI now is they just can't they can't say don't because they have the tools to detect it and to deal with that aren't there. And so now it's just a matter of how much do you use it? And so the professors, instead of talking about AI, they talk about what's acceptable, types of ways you can use it. And they're like, don't let it write it for you, but have it help you with your research, have it help you with organizing your thoughts and outlining and that kind of thing. And I think that's an area, again, that comes down to ethics and organization. And you can deal with some of that in policy, but ethics are hard.
I do think there's
Yeah.
there's some power in that suggestion. Like, use it, but use it for this, not this. Like,
Yeah.
if you plant those ideas in people's heads ahead of time, they're more likely to make the right decision. But obviously, some folks are always going to misuse it.
So we're getting close on time here for the end of the episode. Brian, thank you so much for calling in.
Hey, anytime. I was happy to do it. I'll do it again some other time. This was fun.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. It was great having you on the show.
Great to meet you, Brian.
Hey, you too.
And so, Brent, as we're wrapping things up here, any sort of final thoughts on the conversation we've had today with Brian, or maybe Al's comment, or any of the other stuff that came up that you just kind of want to drive home, or that maybe we didn't mention that you feel like, we should have talked about this?
No, I really appreciate Brian bringing up the ethical component to this. I tend to think of it, AI use cases a lot from a safety and correctness perspective, but yeah, ethics, brings a whole new perspective to it as well. Yeah, just be very, this is the Mindful Business Security Show, so be very mindful in your adoption of AI practices. Um, don't rush into anything as exciting as it may seem. Make sure you're doing your due diligence, and implementing the appropriate guardrails.
One of the things that I just kept thinking as we were talking through all of this is, so much of this comes back to just organizational change 101. And because AI is so new, leaders kind of lose sight of it and they think, oh, this is new and this is all uncharted territory. But when it really comes down to a lot of this, it's organizational change. This is stuff that has been studied for a long time, because organizations are still people at the end of the day, where it's teams and team dynamics. And obviously with AI and ethics, we're going to have to wrestle with, I think, as a society at large, not just within businesses, the concept is like, what does it mean to be human? Like, as AI gets more and more advanced, generative AI gets more and more advanced and is able to do a lot more for us. Like, what's the value in being human? What innately in us is special? and it comes down to value structures. And so much of ethics is based on value structures, and what's ethical and what isn't is going to be determined by the underlying value structures of the person, the organization, the culture, and the society in which that person and that organization operate in.
Yeah, well, we only have to worry about it until we get artificial general intelligence, and then it'll have its own set of ethics.
Right. I'm going to go be a hermit, I think, at that point. Hopefully the AI can't find me. Thank you, Brett, for joining the show and coming back on. It was fantastic to talk to you again. It's always good to talk to you, but as glad to have you agree to come on and share your experience here as well.
Always happy to join.
And a huge thank you again to the callers. Thank you to the audience for listening. If you're listening to the show now on the podcast feed, appreciate it, especially because it's all the way at the end and you're still here. And one last thank you again to Michael Coburn for the amazing theme music for the show. If you want to watch us record live or even participate in an episode, We'll be recording on the third Friday of every month, and you can check the show page for the schedule, the topic information, and links to join and either just watch the show or actually participate. So that's all for today. I'm Accidental CISO, and until next time, stay mindful.
Don't miss our next episode. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app and follow us on social media. Visit Focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast for show information and links to our social media pages. This has been the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity.